She locked the car from the outside. Her husband was still inside. And then she smiled. That one act, quiet, deliberate, devastating, set off a chain of events that would take everything from the man who thought he had everything. But before the revenge, before the collapse, before the moment she looked him in the eyes and said, "You lost, completely and utterly lost." There was a woman who almost didn't survive her own grief. Amelia Hayes, 32 years old, head of marketing, Upper East Side apartment, successful husband, 5-year-old son named Ethan. On paper, the life other women dream about. But under that flawless surface, a marriage quietly dying, a husband whose eyes had stopped seeing her, and a loneliness so deep she had started to wonder if this was simply what love became with time. Then came the night she couldn't pretend anymore, and instead of breaking, she became dangerous. This is not just a story about betrayal. It's a story about what a woman discovers about herself when the life she built turns out to be a beautiful lie, about what it costs to win, and what you might lose in the process. Sometimes the most important battles we fight are the ones that change who we are, not just what we have. If this story speaks to you, share it, like it. Tell us in the comments what you think Amelia should have done differently, if anything. Subscribe to our channel. We're here every week with stories that go deeper than the surface. This content was carefully researched, built, and manually edited by our team, with the purpose of bringing you meaning, reflection, and real lessons from life.
It all ended with a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. A frantic, screeching voice on the other end. Alex's mother. She was babbling about spare keys to his Porsche, how he and some girl were trapped. And in that moment, with ice in my veins, I knew. Amelia's plan was in motion. The quiet war had finally begun. The beginning of the end came 2 months earlier. A 3 a.m. call, and Amelia's voice shattered into a million tiny pieces. She'd found the texts. All I could think about was Jessica Albright from marketing. I'd seen her at company parties, hanging on Alex's arm. He said Amelia was a workaholic, always at the office. I guess that gave him and his protege plenty of time. I remember all the nights Amelia cried to me, clutching a glass of wine. He'd complain she was married to her job, that she preferred the city lights from her office window to him. He'd twist the all-nighters she pulled to secure their future into a story of neglect. "He says I'm cold, Rach," she'd whisper, "but I'm the one paying for that car he loves so much." I was so blind. My best friend, Amelia Hayes, 32, brilliant, and she wore her success like armor. Before this, I worried that armor was keeping everyone out, that she was letting the life Alex painted for her become real. I never, not for a second, imagined she was secretly forging a sword. To everyone else, they were a power couple. The ones you see on social media and hate just a little bit. High-powered lawyer, stunning executive, a wonderful little boy named Ethan, and a downtown apartment that was impossibly beautiful. She confided in me that it had started to feel like a beautiful, empty museum. He told her their storybook marriage was a lie, that all their real conversations had been replaced by logistics about who was getting Ethan from soccer. She believed it was a phase. I now know he was just rehearsing the lines he was feeding to Jessica. Amelia thought she was failing their marriage. He was just setting the stage. I saw them at the Christmas party just before she found out. He kissed her on the cheek, and it looked so fake, so choreographed. Amelia felt an invisible wall between them, and she was trying desperately to tear it down. She never realized he was the one building it, brick by brick, with every lie. What he did to her mind was the worst part. Amelia used to call me, sobbing, telling me how Alex would use their own son, Ethan, as a weapon against her. He'd have Ethan call her late at the office, begging for his mom, then twist it to me and everyone else as proof that her ambition was destroying their family. He painted himself as the victim, the loving father just trying to hold things together. "Just one more thing, sweetie," he'd mock, imitating the way she supposedly ended calls with their son. He described this picture of her, a lonely figure in a big, empty office building. But the way he told it, she wasn't a dedicated professional. She was a cold-hearted woman choosing a paycheck over her child. He was poisoning the well, and for a while, it worked. He told Jessica the only place he felt free was in that car. That was his story. The reality was Amelia, home alone, reading an extra bedtime story to Ethan. While Alex was playing the tortured husband, my friend was holding their entire world together. Those drives through the city were his secret world. He'd talk about his dreams and frustrations, and about how Amelia's face had become a stranger's. I know now he wasn't being deep. He was just manipulating a 20-something girl who didn't know any better. When was the last time we really held each other? That's what he asked Jessica. Amelia told me, weeping, that he had screamed those exact words at her during a fight just the night before. He wasn't sharing his pain. He was recycling it, using it as a weapon and a pickup line. He called Amelia a ghost in her own perfect life. Jessica probably thought she was his savior. But I watched the change in Amelia. The tears dried up, and something cold and sharp took their place. She wasn't a ghost. She was a hunter, and she was learning the terrain. Their spot. The secluded corner of the residential garage. Amelia knew all about it. She'd put a tracker on the car weeks ago. That night, she texted me from a cafe 2 blocks away. She was calm, too calm. "It's time," the message read. My heart hammered in my chest. She was watching a live feed from a tiny camera she'd placed. She described the scene with chilling precision. Then she typed, "I'm turning on the heat." I felt a mix of terror and awe. I can only imagine their confusion turning to fear. The sudden, oppressive heat. The controls not working. Amelia had spent a week studying the car's remote system, the one Alex had been so proud of. He'd shown her how it worked. A fatal mistake. She had them sealed inside his leather-lined status symbol. From her laptop, she controlled the locks, the windows, the climate. I was watching my best friend turn a luxury vehicle into a high-tech prison cell, and I couldn't look away. Then came the text message she sent to his phone. Just her name. She told me she wanted him to know in that moment of sheer panic exactly who was in control. Not the workaholic wife, not the cold executive. Amelia. He'd told her he had a client dinner. It was his go-to excuse. I thought about Jessica Miller, his star designer, and felt a surge of pity, quickly replaced by the memory of Amelia's face when she first told me. He called Jessica his talented protégé. Amelia had heard him say it, his hand on Jessica's back. She told me later that she wasn't hurt by the lie, but offended by the cliché. He wasn't just a cheater, he was boring. Amelia had seen them together, poring over designs. She admitted to me she'd felt a flicker of something. Not jealousy, she said. It was clarity. She wasn't looking at a rival. She was looking at a symptom of the disease she was about to cure. I texted her, my hands shaking. "Are you okay?" A few seconds passed. "I've never been better," she replied. That's what scared me. The absolute lack of emotion. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a strategy session. She described the scene to me. His frantic pulling on the door. The shadow she cast as she walked past the car once, just to watch. There was no pleasure in her voice. Just a sense of grim completion, like checking the last item off a very long list. They were her science experiment. 2 rats in a maze he had built, and she had simply closed the exit. The heat, the panic, the desperation. It was all data she was calmly observing from a distance. There, in the garage of the home she had made, he was being slowly cooked in his own arrogance. And I finally understood her rage. It wasn't hot and loud, it was quiet and glacial. It wasn't that he cheated. It's that he was so lazy, so disrespectful, so utterly mediocre about it. All his stories, all his shared memories were just tools for his affair. Her version of the story was this, a quiet, methodical recalibration of justice. She was the one who had stayed up late working on the deal that paid for the car that was now becoming their tomb. That Porsche was no longer a symbol of his success. It was an instrument of his humiliation. And the only sound was him, a powerful lawyer, beating his fists against the glass like a trapped animal. The self-delusion was burning away, for him and for Jessica. The doors were locked. The engine was off. She knew Jessica was in there, and she knew that Alex, the man who was supposed to be her partner, was nothing more than a spoiled child who had finally been put in a timeout. My chest felt tight just listening to her describe it. I asked her what the point was, why she wouldn't just leave. "Because leaving makes me a victim, Rachel," she said, her voice steady. "I am not a victim. A public screaming match would have been dismissed as hysterics. A messy divorce would have been fodder for gossip. But this was different. This wasn't about getting even. This was about a complete and total victory. This was about burning down the whole rotten structure so she could build something new on the foundations. When I heard Alex's mother on the phone, I knew Amelia had won. She didn't want revenge. She wanted to rewrite the entire game. I listened to his mother's panic, and I thought of Alex, the man I'd seen command a boardroom, reduced to a whimpering mess, calling his mommy to save him. Amelia had taken his ultimate symbol of power and turned it into his cage. A terrifying, beautiful clarity washed over me. "She's insane," his mother shrieked. But I knew better. This wasn't insanity. This was the most rational thing Amelia had ever done. This was the work of a woman who had spent 2 months of sleepless nights, not crying, but planning. In that moment, I saw him clearly through her eyes, a weak boy who had underestimated the woman who built his throne. I had begged Amelia to go to therapy. I had thought their marriage was the problem. I was so naive. I was a pawn, just like Jessica, in a game only Amelia understood. He'd bragged to Amelia about the car's security system. He taught her how to use the app that could control every function remotely. He never once thought that the queen he was cheating on was also a master chess player. After I hung up with his mother, the silence in my apartment was deafening. How long would she leave them? What was the next step? My friend, the woman I'd shared secrets and silly jokes with, was terrifying me, and I had never been more proud of her. I used to envy their perfect life. I realize now that it was never perfect. It was just a story. But Amelia was done being a character in his. She picked up a pen, and in that hot, dark garage, she wrote a new ending for all of us. I remember the nights Amelia would just sit on my couch, silent, twisting her wedding ring. Mark, that's her husband, had been describing her to his new girl as practical, even cold. I knew the truth. Amelia wasn't cold, she was shattered. He wasn't being rescued from a loveless marriage. He was the one who had systematically drained all the love out of it, and my best friend was the casualty. The plan started on a Tuesday. Amelia was tracking his car, and she knew he was taking Jessica, the junior analyst, out to dinner. "Tonight's the night, Rach," she said, her voice flat, clicking through screens on her laptop. When she hit the final key, it was with a terrifying calm. I just stared at her, thinking about them in that Porsche, laughing, completely oblivious that their gilded little world was about to become a cage. "It's done," she murmured, watching a blinking red dot on a map of a downtown parking garage. "The car is completely disabled. Doors, windows, ignition, a brick." The knot in my own stomach was a mixture of horror and a sick, thrilling sense of justice. She hadn't just stalled a car. She had meticulously crafted a trap, and I was watching the predator I never knew lived inside my friend come to life. Everyone thinks they know the person they love. Mark thought he knew Amelia, but he had never met this version, the one forged in the fire of his betrayal. As she calmly pulled up the audio feed from the car, I felt a tremor of fear for her. "He'll feel helpless," she said, her eyes fixed on the screen. "That's the first thing I'm taking from him." It wasn't about revenge anymore. It felt like a psychological dissection. I could hear the faint sound of the other woman's nervous laughter through the laptop speakers. "Jessica." Amelia said her name without a trace of emotion. "She's trying to make it a joke," I whispered. Amelia didn't even look at me. "She'll stop joking soon." Her voice was so devoid of warmth it scared me. She was watching them like a scientist watches a specimen under a microscope. The girl asked if everything was okay. I wanted to scream through the screen. No, nothing is okay. The woman whose life you helped ruin is holding your future in the palm of her hand. But Amelia just leaned closer, a flicker of something, not satisfaction, something colder in her eyes, as she heard the first hint of real fear in Mark's voice. This was all going exactly to plan. Now for the second phase, Amelia said, and she typed another command. A new icon appeared on her screen, a small thermometer. "What's that?" I asked, my own voice barely a whisper. "I'm overriding the climate control," she explained simply. "It's going to get very warm in there." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a prank. This was something else entirely. I looked at my best friend, the woman who cried at sappy commercials, and saw a stranger. She was calm, focused, a general commanding a war from a remote bunker. I thought about the life they built, the future she had believed in, now being incinerated in this calculated act of vengeance. I was terrified for the people in that car, but I think I was more terrified for Amelia's soul. We listened as he tried to call his mother, his voice tight with panic. The calls just kept going to a voicemail box Amelia had set up to mimic his mom's. Each failed attempt was another turn of the screw. "He always calls his mother when he's in trouble," she said, a bitter little smile playing on her lips. "He never called me." The quiet hum of her laptop was the only sound in the room. After 10 minutes that felt like 100 years, Amelia routed a call through. His mom's name flashed on the screen of the car's console. I heard him gasp in relief through the speaker, and for a second, my heart ached for him. Then he answered, and the sound that came out wasn't relief. It was a raw, primal scream of terror. Amelia didn't even flinch. "She did this!" he was screaming, the words garbled by panic. "Amelia did this!" I grabbed her arm. "Ames, this is too much." She just shook her head, her eyes glued to the audio levels on her screen. "No, Rachel, this is just enough." I listened to him beg his mother to save him, calling my best friend a witch, and I felt sick to my stomach. He had made her this. The sound of his mother's real voice, a panicked voicemail Amelia played for him, echoed from the laptop. It was a master stroke of cruelty. All I could think about was Amelia, my friend, orchestrating this entire symphony of suffering with a chilling precision. Mark was yelling for his mom to break down the door, but the only person listening was the wife he had thrown away. "Listen to him," Amelia said softly, and for the first time I heard a crack in her voice, a hint of the broken woman underneath the architect of revenge. "He's not a man. He's a little boy calling for his mommy." She had trapped him not just in a car, but in the truth of his own character, and she was forcing his mistress to watch. We could hear frantic pounding through the speakers, the sound of fists hitting glass. He was panting, his breathing ragged and ugly. The woman, Jessica, was screaming his name. "They look like cornered animals," I said, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. "That's what he made me feel like," Amelia replied, her voice like ice. I thought about the pictures all over their house, Mark, Amelia, and their little boy, Caleb, at the beach, on holidays, a perfect, happy family. It was all a lie, a beautiful, curated lie he had sold not just to the world, but to her. And now, she was burning the whole album down, page by page. Jessica's screams turned into threats against Amelia. "If anything happens to him, I swear," her voice screeched. Amelia leaned back in her chair and a genuine dark smile spread across her face. "Perfect," she whispered. "She still thinks he's the prize. She still thinks he's worth saving." That, I realized, was the whole point. "We have to get out," Jessica sobbed. I looked at Amelia, pleading with my eyes. "Turn it off, Ames, please." But she just shook her head. She was watching a man she once loved finally pay the price for his secrets, and she wasn't going to stop until the debt was settled. Then, with perfect timing, she initiated the call. She routed her own number to his phone. I watched her finger hover over the call button. "He needs to know who's in charge," she said. A moment later, we heard Jessica's frantic voice calling 911. It was useless. Amelia had already looped the garage's security feed and flagged their phones to a dead zone. No one was coming. "A friend is trapped in his car," Jessica shrieked. A friend. The word hung in the air of my quiet living room. Amelia's face was illuminated by her laptop screen, impassive, a mask of cold control. She had taken his car, his freedom, and his power. Now she was taking his hope. This phone call wasn't a lifeline. It was her final devastating weapon. "The internal temperature is now 100 degrees, Amelia announced, reading a data point off the screen. I finally understood. This wasn't about scaring them. This wasn't about humiliation. The rising heat, the sealed space, this felt like something far more permanent. "Amelia," I choked out, "you can't be serious." She just looked at me. She put his phone on speaker so I could hear everything. I heard my own name, Chloe, mentioned in passing. At that moment, it barely registered. All that mattered was my life, our lives, trapped in a metal box that was slowly, deliberately becoming a tomb. I stumbled back, my eyes landing on a framed photo of me and Amelia from college. Two bright, hopeful girls. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who had weaponized a car, who was calmly listening to two people slowly cook in a garage. Then she unmuted her microphone. I held my breath as her voice, calm and clear, filled the car. It was the same voice I'd heard on the phone 1,000 times, but now it was terrifying. For a crazy second, I thought maybe she was going to let them go, that she was going to show some mercy. But then she spoke, and I knew Mercy had left the building a long, long time ago. We heard his answer, a muffled, broken sound. "Amelia." The name was a question, a plea, a curse, all in one. All the power, all the arrogance was gone, replaced by the ragged rasp of pure animal fear. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that my best friend was sitting there, listening, and enjoying every single second of it. "It's so hot," he gasped into the phone. "I can't breathe." My own heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to scream, to rip the laptop away from her, to stop this. But I was frozen, a spectator to my best friend's descent. She had become both judge and jury, and court was officially in session. Her voice cut through his panicked breathing, a blade of ice. "Having a good time, Mark?" A profound, terrifying silence fell over the line. Even his desperate gasping stopped. In that moment, she wasn't his wife. She was his reckoning. I watched Amelia's face. There was no anger, no hatred. There was just a vast, empty calm, a frightening peace. She had absorbed all the pain he had given her for years and was now reflecting it back at him, magnified 1,000 times. She waited, letting him process the calm, conversational horror of her tone. "Amelia, what did you do to my car?" he finally stammered. I almost laughed. After everything, his first thought was for his precious car. Amelia let out a small, chilling laugh that I heard both in the room and through the speakers. "You seem confused, Mark," she said. "That car is yours. You bought it with your money." "It was never ours," she said, and her voice was laced with a venom so pure it was almost beautiful. "As for what I did, I just turned your little toy into a convection oven. It must be 95 degrees in there by now. How much longer do you think you two can last?" I heard the other woman scream that she was insane, but looking at Amelia's face, I knew she had never been more sane in her life. When she told me what she said to him on that final call, I felt a chill run down my spine. I could just hear his voice, all that smug confidence gone, sputtering, "You're crazy. Are you trying to kill us?" And Amelia, she told me her voice was just light. "Kill you?" "Alex, no. You and that intern killed our family. I'm just giving you a chance to sweat out the guilt." She described the call to me later, how she coolly discussed cardio and burning calories while he and the girl were literally baking inside that car. I felt sick, but also a sliver of awe. She told me about the moment the intern started screaming about the heat, clawing at her seatbelt, and Amelia felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. "Shut up, Chloe," he'd screamed. That's what Amelia told me, a small, satisfied smile on her face. Then his voice got small, pathetic. "Amelia, what do you want? I'll give you anything." And just like that, the powerful executive I'd seen her cry over for years was gone, replaced by a terrified little boy trying to bargain his way out of trouble. He actually offered her money. Money. When Amelia told me that, we both just sat there in silence for a moment. All that pain, all the lies, and he thought he could write a check and make it go away. It proved what she'd been saying all along. To him, she was just a transaction. I could almost hear the hollow, empty laugh she must have given him over the phone. He finally shrieked at her, "Then what do you want, you psycho?" And her answer, when she repeated it to me over coffee days later, was the coldest thing I'd ever heard. "Justice," she'd said, her voice flat, devoid of any of the warmth I knew. "You seem to have so much fun in this car. I just want you to enjoy it." Her last words to him were a chilling little promise. "I have all night." Then she hung up. She told me she just disconnected the call and blocked his number. The finality of it was terrifying. She had built a prison, locked the door, and simply walked away, leaving them to the silence and the dread. She knew his car inside and out. She'd set up the security protocols herself years ago. She described with technical precision how she'd created a back door, locking him out of his own system. I listened, mesmerized and horrified, as she explained how he would be fumbling with a console that was now just a useless piece of plastic. I imagine his fists hitting the window, these useless, silent thuds. I imagine him screaming for help into soundproof glass. She'd made sure he parked in the executive section of the garage, the most deserted part. No one was coming. That wasn't an accident. It was architecture. I don't feel sorry for the intern. Not really. She made her choice. But there's a part of me that recognizes the pattern. Alex made her feel special, chosen, the one who understood. He sold her the same lie he sold Amelia, just with a different title. Amelia's plan didn't just expose him. It exposed the foolishness of every woman who ever believed him. The audience was always part of the plan. She'd anonymously tipped off a garage attendant about a strange noise. She didn't want them to get out. She wanted people to gather. She wanted witnesses to his downfall. So when that first flashlight beam cut through the window, it was right on schedule. Did I worry about Ethan? Of course. I asked her, "Amelia, what about your son?" And her face hardened. "The best thing for Ethan," she said, "is for the world to see exactly who his father is. This isn't for me, Rachel. It's for him." In that moment, I believed her, and it scared me to death. The girl in the car probably thought Amelia was there, watching from the shadows. But she wasn't. She was with me, miles away, watching a live feed from a security camera she had hacked. Cool, composed, the director of her own horror film. The masterstroke, the move I still can't get over, was Alex's mother. Amelia had sent her a simple, anonymous text. "Alex is in trouble at the office garage. Please hurry." When she told me that, I had to put my glass down. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about dismantling an entire family's legacy of lies. She wanted his mother to see him not as the powerful man she'd raised, but as a trapped, desperate animal. She wanted her to witness his perfect facade crumble into dust, to hear his pathetic prayers as the air got thinner. And she did. I asked her once if she ever felt guilty about the intern, about what she must have been feeling. Amelia just looked at me. "She was feeling hot," she said. "I was feeling betrayed, humiliated, and crazy for 2 years. A few hours in a hot car seems like a fair trade." Of course he wasn't looking at the girl. Men like Alex never do. In a crisis, their universe shrinks to one person, themselves. Amelia knew that. Part of this whole show was to prove that to the intern, to show her that his supposed love was a fantasy that couldn't survive a little heat. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a prank gone wrong. It was a prison, designed with the cold, brilliant precision of an engineer. Amelia was always the smartest person in any room. Alex just never bothered to notice. She used the very intelligence he'd always belittled to architect his punishment. The young man at the window, the garage attendant, was just a prop. He was there to look terrified, to create a scene, to draw a crowd. He was another pawn on Amelia's chessboard, moved into place to ensure maximum public exposure. "Weren't you afraid he would die?" I whispered to her later, when the news was all over the TV. She just took a sip of her wine. "His vitals were linked to the car's diagnostic system," she said calmly. "I was monitoring his heart rate the entire time. I'm not a murderer, Rachel. I'm a pragmatist." She told me the sound of his mother's scream was the first time she felt a genuine sense of relief. It was the sound of a truth she'd been screaming into the void for years, finally being heard. A mother's agony over the son she thought she knew. The irony was almost poetic. A group of men frantically trying to save a powerful man from a cage built by the woman he underestimated. He had led that poor girl into a fortress of his own making, and his wife held the only key. The intern imagined Amelia standing there, watching. The truth is so much colder. She was on her laptop cross-referencing schematics of the car's ventilation system. It wasn't personal anymore. It was a problem to be solved, and they were just variables in an equation. It was a terrible, brutal lesson for that intern. The man she'd risked her reputation for was nothing more than a scared little boy when the chips were down. Amelia didn't just want to hurt him, she wanted to destroy the myth of him. The trunk release was my favorite part, the most deliciously cruel move. When things were at their absolute worst, she fed a little piece of information to the security guard, knowing it would get back to them. A tiny sliver of hope. She let them have that hope for a full 90 seconds. She watched them on the camera feed, listening to the frantic scrambling, the desperate prayers. She let them believe they were seconds from freedom. And then, she let them have the silence of their failure. Of course the release wouldn't work. She had disconnected the cable that morning. Giving them that false hope was never about rescue. It was about twisting the knife. It was about making them understand the meaning of utter, absolute helplessness. His mother screaming, "You did this, you bitch, you wanted this." That was the public accusation Amelia had been waiting for. She knew it would sound like the ravings of a hysterical woman. By then, Amelia had already called 911 herself, playing the part of the panicked, worried wife. While they were suffocating, Amelia was rehearsing. She was practicing her panicked breathing, her tearful voice. She wasn't just trapping them in a car. She was building a narrative around herself, one of a poor, confused victim. It was a flawless performance. I try not to think about the physical reality of what was happening in that car. The rising heat, the thinning air, the image of Alex, the man who had tormented my best friend, slowly cooking next to the girl he used. It's a horror I can't let my mind settle on for too long. Amelia had been the puppeteer the entire time, pulling every string with meticulous care. The clock on the dashboard was the only thing she couldn't control, but even that worked in her favor. Time itself was becoming part of the torture. They were in there for just under an hour. When she told me, it didn't seem long enough for all the pain he'd caused. But Amelia knew things. She knew how long it would take for disorientation to set in, for real panic to give way to physical decline. The people outside were just shadows, useless spectators at a show they didn't understand. They were looking at a car, but the real monster was miles away watching them on a screen. And yes, they probably felt sorry for her. She'd calculated the temperature increase almost to the degree. She told me she was aiming for 105 degrees Fahrenheit, the point where cognitive function begins to seriously degrade. This wasn't about rage. This was about science. She didn't want him dead. I have to believe that. Death would have been an escape. She wanted him to experience a fraction of the helpless, suffocating terror he'd put her through for years. It wasn't about ending his life. It was about ending his reign. It was never a murder plot. It was a lesson, administered with terrifying precision. And just as their bodies were about to hit their absolute limit, she made the call. The sirens weren't an accident. They were the grand finale, arriving just in time to save him and to officially begin his public humiliation. The sirens and flashing lights were her curtain call, red and blue washing over the faces of the crowd she had assembled. She knew the police arriving would escalate everything, turn it from a weird incident into a major news story. She wasn't just getting revenge, she was creating a spectacle. It played out just as she'd predicted. I watched the news clips later. The frantic mother running to the police, crying about her son. No one knew about the intern yet. She was still Alex's dirty little secret, sweating in a soundproof cage, about to have her life ruined on the 10 o'clock news. I can just picture that girl, whispering his name, telling him they'd be saved. But Amelia knew the police protocol. They wouldn't just smash a window on $1 million car. They would treat it like a bomb threat, a hostage situation. And every delay was just more time in the box. That yellow police tape was the final frame for her masterpiece. It officially quarantined them, separating the sinners from the saints. And then the flashlight beam sweeping across the interior, landing on the intern. The secret was out. Checkmate. And that's when my blood ran cold. Through the windshield, I saw Mark's mother, her face a mess of grief, lift a trembling finger and point right past the barricade tape, right at Amelia. My own fingernails bit into the cheap vinyl of my dashboard. I couldn't hear the scream through the glass, but I felt it. A raw, guttural accusation. It was her. My eyes snapped to Amelia, braced for the crumble, the shattered confusion. But there was nothing, only a beautifully crafted mask of concern folding perfectly into place. Then, right on cue, the tears began to fall. It was a flawless performance. The delicate tremor in her hands as she brought them to her mouth, the convincing shake of her head in disbelief. She was the picture of the horrified, grieving wife. It was an award-winning show, and beside me, Alex actually started to hyperventilate. She wasn't just telling a lie. She was meticulously constructing an entire alternate reality with herself as the central victim. The cops looked lost. You could see it on their faces. They had a screaming mother-in-law on one side and Amelia on the other, playing the part of the weeping, terrified wife. It was a coin toss. Then another officer showed up holding some kind of heavy metal tool. Finally, some action. A little surge of hope, sharp and awful, shot through me, and I hated myself for it. I watched from a dozen feet away as the officer shattered the passenger side window. The sound cracked through the concrete garage. For a second, I thought, that's it. They're saved. But the cop reached inside, fumbled, and pulled his arm back, shaking his head. The door was still locked. The car remained a sealed tomb. Absolutely nothing happened. I could read the growing panic on their faces as they realized this wasn't just a simple jam. I wanted to scream, "Check the network!" But my throat was closed tight. Amelia and I both knew it was useless. She had turned his car into a 2-ton, beautifully engineered brick. "The whole network is down," one of them yelled, his voice carrying through the broken glass. "It's acting like it's being remotely controlled." In that instant, every single cop, every paramedic, turned to look at Amelia. I felt the garage floor drop out from under me. They asked her a question and my blood turned to ice. She knew. This was all her. Her expression was a masterclass in shocked innocence. She gestured with her hands, her voice a soft, believable tremor I couldn't quite make out. But I knew exactly what she was telling them. She was talking about the app, the ridiculous anti-theft app Mark had been so proud of, the one he'd shown her, bragging how he could turn his car into Fort Knox with his phone. "No one gets in or out unless I say so," he'd told her. She'd repeated his exact words to me over a bottle of wine 3 weeks ago. He thought it made him powerful. She thought it made him a monster. Now I was watching her use his own arrogance like a scalpel, painting him as the architect of his own high-tech doom. The sergeant was nodding, buying her story of a tragic glitch, or at least he was buying the doubt it created. He turned to his radio, his back to her. She had given them the perfect out, a plausible story that didn't involve the quiet woman standing right there. She wasn't a suspect anymore. She was just a helpful witness. Looks like a massive electrical failure has locked everything down. Standard overrides aren't working. I need a tech crew and a network specialist out here, stat. Mark's boss, who had shown up, tried to clear the area. All right, people, let's give them some space. We have engineers on the way. The next half hour was a symphony of useless violence. They pried at the doors, then brought out the jaws of life, that insane hydraulic tool you see in movies. Nothing budged. His precious German sports car, the one he used for his little getaways with his assistant, was becoming his coffin, and every screech of metal was another note in Amelia's opera. And Amelia just stood there watching. She was perfectly still as they brutalized her husband's car. There was no worry in her eyes. She was observing. This was her dissertation, and she was watching her theory being proven. The police weren't a rescue team. They were just the final variable in her experiment. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about Mark. This was for me, for his mother, for the crowd that was gathering. The frantic police, the screaming, the eventual media circus. It was all part of the sentence. She wasn't just eliminating a cheating husband. She was staging the public humiliation of his mistress. Just when I thought I was going to be sick, I saw her phone light up. She answered. I watched her listen, her face a careful, unreadable mask. And then I saw it, a subtle shift. It wasn't surprise. It was a signal. It was time for Act 2. Horror began to dawn on her face, but it was slow, deliberate, a performance for the growing audience. It was the face of a wife receiving the worst possible news. But I knew better. She wasn't being told something new. She was being given her cue. Her scream was perfectly timed, piercing the chaos. I couldn't hear her words, but I felt them ripple through the first responders. A new kind of alarm spread through them, and in that exact moment, the faint, reassuring hum of the car's climate control clicked off. The air inside stopped moving. I saw her run to the sergeant, the picture of a frantic, terrified wife delivering the awful update. I knew, with a certainty that made me feel cold despite the humid garage, what she was saying. The ventilation. My God! She had just cut off their air. My mind flashed to them inside. Mark and Jessica. I could almost feel it with them, the sudden oppressive stillness, the heat starting to build. Oh God, Amelia, I whispered to myself. Her words outside had just become their reality inside. She was going to let them suffocate. The chaos outside exploded. I heard new sirens, more frantic this time, fire trucks. They were yelling about carbon monoxide, about bringing in hyperbaric equipment. They were preparing for the consequences of what she had done. They were getting ready to receive the bodies. Now it was a full-on assault. Firefighters swarmed the car while others started tearing into the garage's wall panels, looking for a manual override to the power. And in the eye of the storm, I saw an officer gently lead Amelia behind the yellow tape to take her formal statement. She was literally writing the story as we were all living its horrible conclusion. The heat seemed to press in on me, even from a distance. Mark was being slowly cooked alive a few yards away, and I was watching my best friend calmly, rationally build her alibi, brick by meticulous brick. What kind of person does that? Who discusses a software glitch while their husband gasps for air? I looked from the car back to her. The sweet, heartbroken woman I'd held while she cried over his affair was gone. In her place was this cold, brilliant strategist, and I was her accomplice. My head was pounding. Time had become a thick, hot fog of sirens and shouting. Then a new sound, a muffled yell from above. A firefighter was on the roof of the car, pointing at something. He'd found an opening. I couldn't make out his words, but his tone was unmistakable. Hope. He was pointing at the sunroof, an escape latch. The words echoed in my head. A chance. After all this, they had a chance. I glanced at Amelia, but her face betrayed nothing. But the hope was a lie. The car was dead. The electronic latch was useless. Then I saw another firefighter, a huge man, climb onto the hood with a heavy axe. I understood. They had to go through the roof to get to the manual release. He lifted the axe. The explosion of the sunroof glass was the most beautiful and terrifying sound I had ever heard. A firefighter plunged his arm through the opening, the shattered glass slicing his skin. He was searching blindly inside for the tiny lever that could end this nightmare. A click. It was so small, but in the suffocating tension, it sounded like a cannon shot. "It's open!" someone screamed. The sunroof was shoved aside. "Inside! Can you hear me? Fire department!" The silence that followed was terrifying. They were too late. She had won. Then I saw it. A twitch. One of the bodies moved. That tiny spasm gave me just enough air to gasp. "Help!" A voice rasped from inside. It was barely a sound, but they heard it. They were alive. And the life I had known with my best friend, the person I thought she was completely and utterly over. It started with a lie, just like it ended with one. Working late on the Miller account, she read the text to me off his phone, her face ashen. He was in his car, in that garage, with his assistant. He called it an escape. Amelia called it the end of their marriage. That night, I watched the woman I knew crumble into a million pieces. We talked for hours, finishing a bottle of wine. He'd promised her it was ending, that he was just waiting for the right moment. The oldest lie in the book. Then she laughed, a broken, terrifying sound. "He showed me this stupid security feature," she said. "He said he could turn the car into a fortress." That's when I saw the first flicker of the woman she was about to become. I stood there in the garage, imagining what she had planned for them. The climbing heat, the panic, the air turning thick and soupy. She had described it to the police as a possibility, a tragic accident. But I knew she had researched every detail, every agonizing sensation. This wasn't an accident. It was a sentence. Seeing them pulled out was like watching a movie. The paramedics swarmed, shouting things I didn't understand. They brought Jessica out first, her skin a horrible blotchy red. I heard someone say Mount Sinai, a hospital name that sounded a world away. Then they wheeled Mark right past us. His face was a shade of purple I'll never forget. His eyes were wide open, staring. For a second, I thought he was looking for Jessica, but he wasn't. He was looking right past her, his gaze locked on the woman who had put him there, his wife. The ambulance siren wailed, fading into the distance. It was over. The immediate horror was done. But as I stood beside Amelia, this stranger who looked like my best friend, I felt a different, colder terror take root. The nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. The first time I saw her, she was being wheeled down the hall, and a nurse with exhausted eyes glanced at me and my friend Amelia before muttering something about the girl being lucky. There was an edge to her voice, a coldness that was meant for the unconscious girl on the gurney, but it splashed onto us too. I put a protective arm around Amelia, who stood silent and still. We were supposed to be the victims here, right? Amelia, the betrayed wife. But watching her face, I saw something other than grief, and a feeling like shame, deep and unsettling, began to cool in my own stomach. I must have been lost in thought for a while, because the next thing I knew, a kind-faced doctor was speaking in low tones to Alex's parents. The words drifted across the waiting room. Heat stroke, organ damage. 10 more minutes. Then his voice dropped even lower, and I saw Alex's mother stiffen. "We also found something in her toxicology report," he murmured, glancing toward the girl's room. I looked over at Amelia, expecting shock, maybe even a flicker of morbid curiosity. Instead, her face was a placid lake. The whispers started spreading like a virus. Ketamine. Ecstasy. The words felt alien in the sterile hospital air. That girl, Jessica Miller, was the kind of polished, overachieving young woman Alex always went for. She didn't seem the type, but the story was already taking root. "It's impossible," I heard Jessica's mother whisper hoarsely to her husband down the hall. "There must be a mistake." But the doctor had already moved on, saying something I couldn't quite hear, his expression a mixture of duty and pity. Then I saw it. 2 police officers walking in, their presence instantly changing the air in the room. This wasn't just a medical crisis. They had to inform the narcotics division, someone said. The entire world seemed to pivot in that moment. Narcotics, a police investigation. The terrible accident was morphing into a potential crime scene, and the lead roles were being recast. Jessica Miller was no longer the other victim. She was the prime suspect. I thought of Alex, his perfect life now in ashes, and his wife beside me, so perfectly composed. The narrative was being written, and Amelia, I realized with a sudden, sickening jolt, was holding the pen. I closed my eyes, and a memory surfaced. Amelia, weeks ago, telling me about the new security system in Alex's car, a dumb feature he was so proud of, she'd said with a hollow laugh, one that could lock the doors and close the sunroof from an app on his phone. A trap. The thought was so ugly I pushed it away, but then I looked at Amelia's face, a mask of calm control, and I saw her. Not the grieving wife, but the architect. Later, I watched those same 2 officers enter Jessica's room. One of them, a Sergeant Davis, had a face like granite. He didn't look at her chart with pity. He looked at the door with something like disgust. Amelia just sat there, methodically stirring a cup of tea she never drank, playing the part of the concerned wife to perfection. A nurse passed by, gossiping in a low voice. "Can you believe it? She's telling them she has no idea how the drugs got there, claiming someone must have set her up." The nurse rolled her eyes. Of course it sounded crazy. It sounded like the desperate, rambling denial of someone caught red-handed. It was, I realized, the most believable lie. My blood went ice cold when I saw Sergeant Davis approach Amelia. I saw her look up, her eyes wide with manufactured grief. I just knew, he was asking about the car. I could almost hear her voice, soft and broken, telling him how proud Alex was of his remote security system, how he could control everything from his phone. A feature, she would tell him, that Jessica was surely aware of. I didn't have to see Jessica's reaction to know what was happening. I felt it in the air. The whispers in the waiting room had turned venomous. She wasn't the other woman anymore. She was the drugged-up homewrecker who tried to murder her married lover when things went south. Her knowledge of that stupid app was her motive, her silence, her guilt. After the police left her room, a profound quiet settled over our side of the waiting area. The only sound was the rhythmic beep of a monitor down the hall, each one a nail in Jessica Miller's coffin. I watched Alex's mom, Margaret, take Amelia's hand, telling her how strong she was. The story they were all believing, the story Amelia had so masterfully crafted, was perfect. I caught a glimpse of Alex as they wheeled him past. His eyes, hazy with medication, found Amelia's. I saw it then. It wasn't relief. It wasn't love. It was the raw, primal shock of someone who has just seen the monster hiding in plain sight. He wasn't looking at his wife, his savior. He was looking at the woman who had just dismantled his entire world. He knew, and in that moment, I knew everything. Amelia hadn't wanted to kill him. Death would have been a mercy. She wanted to ruin him. She wanted to burn his perfect life to the ground and dance in the ashes. And to do that, she needed a villain so plausible, so tragically flawed, that no one would ever suspect the quiet, grieving wife. She needed Jessica Miller, the young, ambitious girl from his office, the one who was naive enough to think their affair was a love story. Amelia hadn't just trapped them in a car. She had trapped that poor girl in a narrative she could never escape. She let Alex live, but she buried Jessica. And God help me, it was working. It was a masterpiece of destruction. I heard Margaret on the phone, her voice dripping with venom. "He's alive, thank God, but he was with his drug addict mistress." That stain would never wash out. Alex would live, but he would forever be the man who was brought low by a sordid criminal affair. I was her friend, her confidant. I was collateral beauty, I guess. the shoulder to cry on that validated her performance. When a doctor came to give Amelia an update, his face was grim. He said Alex was stable, but when his eyes flickered toward Jessica's room, they hardened. Her situation, he said carefully, is a bit more complex. He started talking about hallucinogens, about the way the drugs and the intense heat had savaged Jessica's nervous system. I heard him use phrases like cognitive impairment and potential long-term memory loss. It made her the perfect, unreliable narrator for her own life, a detail so perfect it couldn't have been planned, but one Amelia accepted like a gift. Then he said the words that sealed it, the final move in Amelia's checkmate. We were, of course, required to notify the police narcotics division. It was no longer a messy domestic drama. Alex's affair was a scandal, but Jessica's alleged drug use was a felony. The game had changed entirely. I could practically feel the world outside that hospital room turning on Jessica Miller. She wasn't a young woman who'd made a terrible mistake. She was a criminal. She was the reason this all happened. Her affair with Alex was no longer just a betrayal. It was now the motive for a crime they were certain she had committed. The whispers about Alex changed too. The sympathy was curdling into a kind of pitying disgust. He wasn't just the victim of a terrible accident, he was the fool who got caught, the golden boy whose life was shattered because he got tangled up with the junkie from the office. And through it all, Amelia was seen as the blameless victim. I remembered when she got the call. I was with her. There were no tears, no hysterics, just a chilling, absolute stillness. At the time, I called it shock. Now I saw it for what it was, the quiet, terrifying pride of a chess master watching her gambit pay off flawlessly. She might not have planned for the overdose, but it slotted into her narrative so perfectly, she might as well have. I was sitting right beside her when Sergeant Davis approached, his demeanor softened by her apparent fragility. "Ma'am, we need to get a more detailed statement from you," he said gently. Amelia looked up, her face a perfect portrait of a grieving wife. "Whatever you need, Sergeant," she whispered. He led her away into a private office. I knew what she was doing in there. She was feeding them the story she had been crafting for months. The worried wife, the gut-wrenching discovery. She would cry at exactly the right moments. She would express confusion and heartbreak. She would tell them everything they needed to hear to see Jessica Miller as a monster. "How did you know about the remote system?" he would ask. And Amelia would give that sad little smile I knew so well. Oh, Alex was so proud of it. A security feature, he called it. She would use his own pride, his own words, as the rope to hang him and the girl he'd betrayed her with. And it would all sound so tragically true. "Anything unusual about his state of mind?" he would press, and Amelia would sigh, the very picture of a long-suffering wife. He was so stressed with work, so distant lately. She was painting a masterpiece, turning their troubled marriage into the backdrop for a crime. She wasn't just destroying his career, she was rewriting their history, with Jessica cast as the villain on every single page. A nurse mentioned that the first thing Jessica asked when she woke up was, "Where's Alex? Is he okay?" Even then, after everything, her first thought was for him. It was so pathetic, so predictable, and so perfectly in character for the obsessive mistress Amelia had framed her to be. Let's be clear, I knew about the affair. Amelia showed me the texts, the ones where Alex promised Jessica they had a once-in-a-lifetime connection, and that his marriage was just paper. I saw the whole pathetic fantasy unfold. Jessica wasn't special. She was a cliché. I just never imagined Amelia would be the one to weaponize that cliché to blow their world apart. I watched Alex's mother, Margaret, stare at Jessica's room as if she wanted to set it on fire with her mind. Her hatred was loud and hot, but it was nothing. Absolutely nothing compared to the cold, patient rage I'd seen simmering in Amelia for months. The fury of the woman who played the long game, the one who never raised her voice, was infinitely more terrifying. The final act was swift. I overheard Sergeant Davis talking to another officer. They were running tests on Jessica's purse. She was a person of interest, forbidden from leaving the city. I looked at my friend, my beautiful, broken friend Amelia, who was now being escorted out by her in-laws, looking like a fragile doll, and I felt a tremor of fear mixed with a dark and terrible awe. She had won. She had burned it all down. I remember the first call. It wasn't about a fire or police, it was just tears. "He's cheating on me, Rach." The sound of my best friend's heart shattering over the phone is something I'll never forget. A part of me just wanted to tell her to pack her bags and get out. I thought her pain would lead to an escape. I never imagined it would curdle into a meticulously planned war, with that other woman's life as the first casualty. A few days later, her tone shifted. The weeping was gone, replaced by an unnerving calm. She sent me a link, no text, just a single cryptic word: overture. I clicked, and my own stomach lurched. It wasn't just a gossip piece, it was a character assassination, with grainy photos of the girl Chloe and Alex looking like criminals. The headlines were pure savagery, crafted for maximum impact. Architect's affair ends in flames. Colleagues' drug problems cited. It was all there, twisting a sordid tryst into something premeditated and vile. I saw Amelia's invisible fingerprints all over it, especially the detail about some toy, painting the girl not just as an adulterer, but as a reckless deviant. My friend was turning a private betrayal into a public execution. I watched online as they called this Chloe girl a predator. They built this whole story of a corporate succubus destroying the perfect family. It was a masterpiece of narrative warfare, and it was spreading like a virus. I realized then that Chloe's biggest mistake wasn't sleeping with a married man. It was sleeping with a man whose wife had the strategic mind of a 5-star general. Amelia had shown me the file weeks before. Insurance, she'd called it. Photos, timelines, screenshots of texts. I thought it was for a divorce lawyer, but I was wrong. It was an arsenal. She'd weaponized every detail, seeding the internet with poison like Chloe Miller, Homewrecker, and Vance Affair. She was engineering a reputation, and the blueprints were flawless. And God, the world devoured it. A salacious story about a wealthy architect and his young, reckless mistress. It was irresistible. Within a day, this woman was infamous. I saw the hashtag number Chloe the Wrecker, and I felt a chill. My kind, gentle Amelia had set a stranger on fire and was now warming her hands by the flames. The comments were a mob sharpening their pitchforks. "She deserves it." Poor Amelia. They were casting my friend as the tragic victim, and she let them. But one comment stood out, a moment of horrifying clarity. "You're all idiots. The wife is a genius. This is revenge." That person had no idea how right they were. This Chloe girl was the perfect sacrifice. Making everyone hate her made it so much easier for them to forgive Alex. But I watched the narrative evolve exactly as Amelia predicted. She wasn't just the wronged wife anymore. She was becoming a symbol of female rage, a hero. I was watching my best friend become a legend, and it terrified me. She never once went to that hospital. Alex's mother would call, screaming, and Amelia would put on a heart-wrenching performance about needing to protect their son from the scandal. But the minute she hung up, the mask was gone. She was feeding the fire, a general directing the battle from her command center miles from the front line. I knew what was happening to Chloe without ever meeting her. The drug charge, carefully placed to annihilate her credibility. The public condemnation that made her unemployable. Amelia had thought of everything. She had surgically dismantled this woman's life, ensuring there was no way for her to fight back. A friend who works at their firm told me Chloe was placed on indefinite leave. It was a corporate death sentence. Amelia didn't even flinch when I told her. She just nodded, as if ticking an item off a checklist. "Good," was all she said. Chloe's life had been a casualty of a war she never even knew she was fighting. I was the one who kept thinking about their son, Ethan. "Leah, this will follow him forever," I'd pleaded with her. She looked at me, her eyes like chips of ice. "Alex's choices will follow him forever," she corrected me. "I'm just making sure the right person pays the bill." She saw the affair not as a mistake, but as a debt, and she was determined to collect. She told me her plan over a bottle of wine. It was never about a simple divorce. "He doesn't get to walk away clean, Rach. He doesn't get to just start a new life." She wanted to leave him with nothing. No career, no reputation. And Chloe? She was the billboard for his sins, the living embodiment of his failure. The day of the fire, she called me after dialing 911. Her voice was steady, almost serene. "I'm taking Ethan out of school for a park day," she'd said. It hit me then. This wasn't a mother protecting her child from trauma. This was a chess master clearing the board, positioning her king in a castle before unleashing her attack. I was at her house when the hospital called. Alex was awake. She put the phone on speaker, and we heard the nurse say he was asking for her. Screaming her name, actually. Cursing her, then begging for her. He wasn't asking for his mistress. Amelia closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, I saw her smile. A genuine, terrifying smile. The next day, the news broke that Amelia had filed for divorce. The timing was perfect. The delayed emergency call, the media storm, the way the drug charges stuck solely to Chloe. It was a symphony of destruction, and she was its composer. Chloe Miller wasn't the love of his life. She was just the opening note in Amelia's masterpiece of revenge. Amelia had shown me their texts, the cringy, cliché promises Alex made. "A glass house just for us," she'd read aloud, then laughed a hollow, bitter laugh. She saw the affair for the pathetic fantasy it was, and she knew that the only way to destroy a fantasy is with a cold, brutal reality. He made that girl feel special, chosen. Amelia knew that was his pattern. He'd talk to her about a future, a life beyond his marriage, just like he had with the woman before Chloe. Amelia knew his playbook by heart, and she used that knowledge to predict his every move and counter it with devastating force. She wasn't a soulmate, Amelia told me. She was an escape hatch. And Amelia's goal was to seal off every exit, burn every bridge, and leave him trapped in the rubble of the life he blew up. She wasn't just defending her home, she was salting the earth so nothing could ever grow there again. I can only imagine what his mother, Margaret, thought. She must have seen Chloe as the devil incarnate, the girl who ruined her perfect son. When she went to confront Amelia, she probably thought she was defending her family. She had no idea she was walking into the web of the woman who was actually in charge. Margaret probably shrieked at her, blaming her for not being a better wife. And Amelia, my Amelia, would have absorbed it all with that perfect, placid mask of concern she'd perfected. She let Margaret think she was an ally, all while secretly directing the forces that were tearing her family apart. Her excuse for not visiting Alex was pure genius. "I need to be here for Ethan." It painted her as the noble mother, the pillar of strength. In reality, she was biding her time, letting the online mob she had unleashed do all the dirty work. Chloe wasn't the reason she couldn't visit. She was the excuse. Margaret probably fell for the act completely, maybe even praised Amelia for her strength. She might have suspected Amelia wanted a divorce, but she could never have fathomed the truth, that Amelia wasn't using the scandal as leverage. The scandal was the plan. "Alex is my whole world," I heard her say to Margaret on the phone, her voice cracking perfectly. The words were true, but not in the way Margaret understood. He was her whole world to conquer and destroy. She didn't want to just walk away. She wanted to leave him so utterly ruined that no woman would ever want what was left. The most twisted part was watching his mother and his wife supposedly conspiring to manage the PR crisis, both believing they were protecting Alex. But Margaret was just a pawn. Amelia had chosen Chloe as her weapon, Alex as her target, and his own mother as collateral damage. The night it all began, her first call to me was chillingly lucid. She described the sirens, Alex on the ground, and Margaret's primal scream. Then she told me she'd calmly handed her mother-in-law a glass of water, murmuring something about keeping a clear head. In that moment, I knew the woman I'd known was gone. She wasn't a victim in this story. She was the author. She would test her lines on me. What do you think of this? I just wonder if the pressure of the affair was too much for him to handle. Every word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to paint Chloe as the cause of his collapse. She was turning their reckless passion into a psychological burden, with Chloe as the toxic source. While Chloe was answering questions at a police station, Amelia was calming a hysterical mother-in-law, positioning herself as the only sane person in the room. "Let's focus on Alex's recovery and the company's image," she'd told Margaret. She was already controlling the narrative, already the saint in a story full of sinners. Amelia was uploading the files before the ambulance doors even closed. She'd explained her strategy to me days earlier about narrative control and the importance of the first news cycle. While Margaret was panicking about her son and Chloe was panicking about her freedom, Amelia was calmly executing a media strategy she had been planning for months. It started with a whisper, something Amelia planted herself. "Police are looking into her for a drug problem," she showed me on some sleazy online forum. I felt sick. I knew Jessica, and the strongest thing she ever touched was a weekend mimosa. It was a vicious, calculated lie, and seeing the cold satisfaction in Amelia's eyes, I understood. An affair was just gossip. Tying the company's golden boy to an addict? That was character assassination. That was the opening move in a game I didn't know she was playing. She sold the entire story to his mother as a crisis management plan. I can still hear her rehearsing it with me, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "We have to present a united front, Margaret," she'd practiced. "It was just a terrible accident." She concocted this insane narrative about a malfunctioning toy car, something so bizarre it was almost believable. In one conversation, she began to methodically erase Jessica and the entire affair, replacing it with a clean, corporate-approved lie. And then, the final blow. Amelia forwarded me the official company statement before it went public. It mentioned Jessica by name, referencing her personal issues and private struggles. It offered sympathy to Alex, who was painted as a complete victim of my friend's apparent instability. With a few perfectly crafted sentences, she had transformed Jessica from his lover into his predator. She wasn't the other woman anymore. She was a lunatic who had targeted him. It was a flawless, terrifying checkmate. Amelia constructed this narrative fortress around Alex, crowning him a victim while simultaneously branding Jessica as dangerously unhinged. It was no longer a story of two people who fell in love. It was much neater than that. It was a story about a defective product and a mentally unwell girl. Blame the toy. Blame Jessica. Blame anyone but the man she was about to destroy. Second, we control the story, Amelia told me later, showing me the comments section on a news article. "Look, Rachel, they're on our side. People feel sorry for him. We just need to pour some money into a few key accounts to keep that sympathy flowing. The official story is a devoted wife, standing by her husband after a predator targeted him. We'll just overwhelm them with so much noise that nobody can find the truth," she explained, her eyes gleaming. "The only story they'll remember is the one we're writing for them." I imagined Alex's mom, Margaret, staring at that same screen, not quite understanding the technology but feeling the raw, brutal force of a lie told well. The lie that was burying Jessica alive. I remember asking Amelia how Margaret reacted to the cost of it all. "She was worried," Amelia said with a dismissive wave of her hand. She said, "This sounds so expensive." And Amelia's reply was so smooth, so perfect. "It's a necessary expense, Margaret, an emergency." Then she told me she offered up their joint savings, framing it as the ultimate sacrifice for their family, the perfect loyal wife to the very end. That single move, her willingness to drain their own bank account, was what truly sold Margaret. It was a performance of total commitment, of a wife fighting for her husband. But I knew better. She wasn't fighting for him. She was buying an arsenal for his public execution, and his own mother was helping her load the weapons. She presented a rescue mission, and they accepted it without a single question. So Margaret got on board. She started making the calls, becoming the public voice for Amelia's lies. The second his mother was in her pocket, Amelia had absolute control. She probably told Margaret to go home and rest, while her mind was already calculating the next 10 steps. His mother had just become a pawn in a war she didn't realize was being waged against her own son. I see it all so clearly now, looking back. The moment Margaret left the room, that mask of the worried wife would have dissolved from Amelia's face. She weaponized a mother's instinct to protect her child, twisting it into a tool for her own cold, methodical revenge. Margaret and Alex thought they were navigating a crisis, but they were just characters in her script, speaking her lines. Jessica was never the real enemy. I realized that with a jolt. She was just collateral damage, a convenient excuse Amelia could use to create the chaos she needed to burn Alex's entire world down. That company statement wasn't about Jessica at all. It was the first shot fired at him. A brilliant piece of corporate spin that sympathized with the victim while making it clear she was the source of all the trouble. His mother played her role without a flaw. She called her friends in high society, her contacts at the local news, repeating every single lie Amelia had fed her. She thought she was protecting her son, but all she was doing was helping his wife dig his professional grave, one phone call at a time. And God, it worked. I watched it happen in real time. The headlines started to change. CEO in violent incident became Alex Vance, a victim of calculated manipulation. That story of the attic mistress she'd created took root and spread like a virus. The wave of public anger that was meant for him was expertly rerouted by Amelia to drown Jessica first, then to come for him. The truth wasn't just buried, it was suffocated under a mountain of their own money and her perfectly constructed lies. This was her real plan. She had created a 5-front war for Alex to fight. The police, his investors, the media, his own manipulated family, and Jessica, the woman he loved, now silenced and painted as a monster. He was completely cornered, flailing in the chaos she had orchestrated so beautifully. He couldn't get to Jessica, he couldn't trust his parents, and he couldn't save his company. And Amelia just sat back with a glass of wine, watching the spectacular, intricate disaster she had created unfold. It was terrifying and, honestly, a little bit brilliant. A friend of mine, who still works at his company, sent me a screenshot from an internal chat a few nights later. Alex was having a meltdown in the hospital. He was refusing his pain meds and screaming to see Amelia. He was calling for the one person who was systematically taking him apart, piece by piece. The irony was so dark it was almost funny. I can just picture Margaret's frantic call to Amelia, begging her to go see him. Amelia told me about it, her voice as cold as ice. "I'll visit when he's out of the ICU." At his lowest point, when he was crying out for her, she held salvation just beyond his grasp. "The doctors say he needs calm," his mother must have pleaded. "Then they should sedate him," Amelia replied. "He needs to learn that actions have consequences." When she told me she said that to his mother, a chill went down my spine. She wasn't his wife anymore. She was his judge, jury, and, I was beginning to fear, his executioner. She hung up the phone, leaving Alex to languish in that hospital bed, reaching for a woman who was no longer there. He was in a free fall, and she was just watching. The Amelia he knew, the quiet, agreeable wife he used to complain to Jessica about over $1,000 bottles of wine, was gone. This person who had taken her place was a creature of pure, tactical vengeance. I think even his own mother must have felt it then, a sudden cold dread, the horrifying realization that she had placed her trust in the wrong woman. He must have sent her a furious, rambling text from his hospital bed, full of rage and utter confusion. Amelia showed it to me and just laughed before typing back something short, icy, and final, something that made it clear that they were finished. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just kept thinking, how did I not see this side of her? What had they unleashed? They say it's always darkest before the dawn, but for them, the sun just never rose again. When Alex was finally discharged from the hospital, Amelia and I read about it on a gossip site. He wasn't going home to his wife and their perfect life. He was going home to an empty apartment. It took less than 10 days for his entire world to be dismantled. He was sent home to recuperate, which Amelia told me was just corporate language for, "You're fired." After the public relations nightmare she had so masterfully engineered, his partners couldn't wait to cut him loose. A man publicly tied to a scandal with an unstable employee with a drug problem was toxic. His career was finished. All those late nights he'd spent building his empire, all that ambition, it evaporated. He was trapped in his penthouse, a king in a glass castle, finally understanding that his wife had just pulled off the most elegant corporate coup in history, and his own mother had been her accomplice. The day Amelia finally went to see him, she walked in with the unnerving calm of a general surveying a conquered battlefield. She told me Margaret was there, a nervous wreck, wringing her hands. I'm sure his mother thought Amelia had been meeting with divorce lawyers, but she'd gone straight for the jugular, his office. She told me how she walked right up to the top floor and asked for the heads of legal and public relations, using a tone that left no room for argument. For a split second, Margaret probably felt a surge of pride, thinking Amelia was there to defend him. The poor woman still thought they were on the same side. What a fool. I can picture the scene she described to me. The two executives, some stuffy guy named Mr. Davis and a sharp-looking woman in a blazer, speaking down to her with their rehearsed plastic sympathy. They just saw a distraught wife, a mess to be cleaned up. They assured her they were handling Alex's situation, but Amelia wasn't there for their pity. "I'm not here to assign blame," she told them, her voice like ice. "I'm here to discuss a plan." A plan. I watched Amelia's face as she recounted this, and I felt a shiver. It wasn't a conversation. It was a sentencing. She spun some tale for Margaret about how she passionately defended him, arguing that his legacy was too important to be ruined by a personal mistake. And Margaret, desperate for any good news, believed every word. She wanted to believe her son's life wasn't a house of cards, ready to be blown over by the woman he had betrayed. Of course, the executives were fighting her. Amelia told me that this Mr. Davis kept rambling about brand integrity and partnership agreements, treating the whole thing like a simple negotiation. They were all still treating her like some emotional, hysterical wife. They had no idea they were in a room with a shark who already smelled blood. Then she told me about the document she pulled from her purse. A letter of intent, she called it. The deal she proposed was for Alex to sign over 30% of his shares to his partners, for a fraction of their actual value. My stomach dropped when she said it. Even then, it felt so wrong. Why would his own wife propose a deal that would financially gut him? Amelia told me what she demanded from Mark's company: a public clearing of his name, an insane severance package, and a permanent title as an honorary director. It sounded, on the surface, like she was fighting for him. She said she'd been cooped up with their lawyers for 3 straight days, and I imagined my friend, fiercely loyal, defending her husband. I had no idea she was actually forging the bars of his cage. It took me a minute to grasp the brutal elegance of it. That 30% of the company wasn't just money, it was his power, his whole identity. Taking that from him meant he was nothing more than a ghost haunting the boardroom. And selling it at a rock-bottom price wasn't a negotiation tactic. It was designed to bleed him dry. The payout was practically an insult, a drop in the ocean of what he'd built. But the honorary director role? That was the truly twisted part. It wasn't about respect. It was about control. It was a gilded leash, forcing him to watch his empire crumble from a front-row seat, all while they sent him a check for his silence. Amelia said the board, Mr. Davis and the rest of them, were completely blindsided. They expected a sobbing wife, not a corporate executioner. They told her the terms were cold-blooded. I can only imagine. They looked at the woman they'd dismissed as Mark's pretty wife and saw someone with more ice in her veins than any of them. "Can he even handle the pressure anymore?" she had asked them, her voice dripping with the fake concern she had perfected. "His personal reputation is in ruins." When she told me she'd said that, I felt my stomach clench. She was weaponizing his breakdown, the very crisis I thought was bringing them together, as a bargaining chip. She was liquidating his soul. "He's become a liability," she'd told the board. "Isn't it more prudent to just cut your losses?" Every word was a dagger, aimed not just at the empire he adored, but straight at his heart. That's when I started to feel a creeping dread. This wasn't about saving Mark's career, it was about ending it. But her final move was the one that made me feel complicit. She brought up the other woman, Chloe, the looming investigation. She let them imagine the circus, the secrets that would come crawling out and poison the company's reputation. She held the threat of mutual destruction over their heads, and Chloe was the weapon she was aiming. I can just see their faces. The moment it dawned on them that they weren't negotiating with Mark's wife, but with the architect of his demise. And me? I was calling Amelia every night, telling her to be strong, that they'd get through this, completely oblivious to the fact that she was the one orchestrating the entire collapse. My naive support for her still makes me feel sick. Of course they agreed to her terms. She had them backed into a corner. In a final, chilling act of fake mercy, she let Mark keep 15% of his shares, just enough to make it look like she was being kind, while ensuring he was forever tied to the company he could no longer run. He got his title, his payout, and a lifetime sentence of irrelevance. After Amelia explained the whole thing to me over coffee, she just sat there stirring her latte in silence. And in that quiet moment, the full, terrifying scope of her plan hit me. This was never a negotiation. She had performed a flawless surgical removal of the man I thought she loved from his own life, leaving behind an empty suit with a fancy title. I remember running into her a few days later, trying to sound like a normal, concerned friend. "Amelia, how are you holding up through all this?" I asked, but my voice felt thin. I was going for supportive, but honestly, what I felt was a deep, gut-wrenching fear of the woman sitting in front of me. "It's handled," she said, her voice completely flat. As she walked me through the final details, my unease grew. "But giving up 30% of his stock," I pushed back, "and for that price, that can't be right, Amelia." I was still thinking about his pride, about the money. I hadn't yet seen the absolute demolition she had planned. "Mark's health is the only thing that matters now," she recited, her expression perfectly composed. "He needs all of us to support his recovery." She sounded like a press release. It was an Oscar-worthy performance of the devoted wife, and for a terrifying second, even knowing what I knew, I almost believed her. My eyes started to water, a confusing mix of pity for him and a growing terror of her. "You're being so strong for him," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I felt like an idiot praising the woman who was systematically dismantling him. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes then, a cold, hard victory that had nothing to do with love. In the weeks that followed, I watched her play the part of a saint for the public. She told me about her daily visits to him, not to bring comfort, but to serve as a quiet, constant reminder of her total victory. She even sat for a television interview, a masterclass in portraying the strong, wronged wife standing by her man. And everyone bought it. The world turned her into a hero, a symbol of female resilience. Amelia, the woman who had just committed a clean corporate assassination of her husband, was being celebrated as a feminist icon on the rubble of his life. The irony was so suffocating, I could barely stand it. And Mark, he just seemed to evaporate. He became a cautionary tale, a ghost haunting the company he'd founded. His affair with Chloe was framed as the ultimate betrayal, and Amelia was the graceful victim who had somehow found the strength to forgive. It was the most public, brutal, and flawlessly executed revenge I could ever have imagined. She would tell me how he was falling apart almost clinically, The drinking had escalated. He was leaving her rambling, incoherent voicemails. All that incredible energy, that power that had made him so successful, she was methodically burning it to the ground. I realized this wasn't just anger. She was collecting on a debt, and the price was his entire identity. He had been a force of nature, a true titan in his industry. But Amelia had systematically dismantled him, piece by piece, until he was completely broken. When she told me he'd finally checked himself into rehab, she sounded relieved. Not for him, but because another phase of her plan was complete. She described her visits to him in the hospital, how she'd bring him soup and talk to him in that soft, patronizing tone. "The doctors say you need your rest," she'd tell him, playing the role of caring nurse instead of the woman who had put him there. He'd just stare at her, she said, the hatred in his eyes being the only thing left of the old Mark. "You're loving this, aren't you?" he finally managed to say to her one day. And with that terrifying calm she now possessed, she denied it. "I'm doing what is best for our family, Mark, for Ethan." She was using their own son as a shield for her cold-blooded revenge. It was unbelievably cruel. She told me he just started laughing, a broken, hollow sound. "You call this love?" he'd screamed at her. "You're the cruelest person I've ever met." He had destroyed her with his betrayal, but looking at my friend, I had the sickening realization that she was just so much better at playing the long game. I knew the final act had begun when Amelia called me, her voice as steady as ever. She said she'd stopped by the house and left a folder on the coffee table. Inside were the divorce papers. He'd apparently asked her if this was really happening. She looked right at him and said yes, it was. She listed the terms for me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. She was giving him the house, one of the cars, a generous settlement. To him, it probably looked like she was being kind, but I knew my friend. This wasn't generosity. It was the final, precise cut designed to leave him utterly alone in a gilded cage. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a public declaration of his complete and utter failure. What good is a mansion when your family's gone? What's the point of a luxury car when you have nowhere to go? She was giving him all the trappings of his old life, but she had taken the life itself. He had apparently swept the papers off the table and started screaming. She told me she just calmly bent down, picked them up, and informed him he had 1 week to sign. The powerful man she had married was gone, replaced by a terrified man. And for the first time, I felt truly scared of what she would do next. She didn't tell me at first about her final threat, the one that tied his fate to Chloe's legal problems. I saw it on the news like everyone else. The implication that Mark's drug use could get him tangled up in Chloe's court case. That's when I knew this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about total annihilation. For so long, I saw Amelia as the one who had destroyed Mark's world. But it took me a while to admit the truth. He gave her the matches and the gasoline. She was just the one ruthless enough to light the fire and burn away all the lies, starting with him. She was turning him into a ghost, and I was just watching it happen. Chloe's trial felt like the grand finale of Amelia's production. Watching the news, I just prayed they wouldn't drag Mark's name into it, but I knew they would. Chloe got 2 years probation for her cooperation. She walked out of that courthouse a free woman. But in reality, Mark's sentence had just begun. A reporter asked Chloe about Mark, and she gave them the soundbite Amelia had been waiting for. A quiet, shaky confirmation that he seemed to be on some kind of stimulant. 1 little sentence, that's all it took. It was the final nail in his public coffin, and Amelia never even had to get her hands dirty. The fallout was instantaneous. The internet tore him to shreds. Mark was no longer just a cheating husband, he was a drug addict, a degenerate. They called Amelia a survivor, a saint. I had to close my phone, the venomous comments making me feel physically ill. She had won, completely and utterly. I used to keep magazine clippings of Mark's accomplishments, proud of my friend's successful husband. Now, every news alert with his name felt like a tiny wound. The powerful man he used to be was gone, replaced by a hashtag, a meme, a disgrace. and the woman who did it was my best friend. I remember the day the old Amelia died. It wasn't loud. It was a text message, a screenshot sent from a fake account, her husband Alex with another woman. I drove to their sterile glass penthouse and found her on the floor of their closet, surrounded by his perfectly tailored suits, just silent. That's where the storm began, not in a boardroom, but in the quiet wreckage of my best friend's heart. For months I watched grief curdle into something else, something cold and sharp. She stopped crying. Instead, she started studying. She'd ask me questions about stock vesting, about liability clauses, things the old Amelia, the art history major, never cared about. She was mapping his empire, not to save it, but to find its fault lines. That 15% stake he was so proud of became her primary target. I was with her the night she decided to burn it all down. We were drinking wine in my tiny apartment, the city lights twinkling below. She was staring out the window, and she said so quietly I almost missed it, "He built his kingdom on my life, Rachel, on the years I gave him." She turned to me, and her eyes weren't sad anymore. They were like steel. "It's time to foreclose." The transformation was terrifying to watch, the soft edges of her personality sharpened into blades. She started dressing in these severe, beautiful power suits, like armor. She met with lawyers I'd never heard of, financial analysts who looked like they ate numbers for breakfast. One night, I saw a folder on her coffee table labeled Project Nightingale. I didn't ask. I was too afraid of the answer. The day the news broke, my phone exploded. Everyone was asking if Amelia was okay. I went over to her place expecting to find her celebrating. Instead, she was on the floor building a Lego castle with her son Ethan. She looked up at me, a calm, serene smile on her face, and just said, "It's done." The finality in her voice chilled me to the bone. She told me a little about that last meeting, how he just crumbled. She said he kept asking her why, as if he had no idea. She told me she looked at the man she'd once loved, a man who cost more than my apartment and felt absolutely nothing. He called himself a king, she told me, her voice flat, but he was just a house of cards. I was just the breeze. He'd apparently begged her, asking if seeing him with nothing made her happy. I asked her the same thing, my voice trembling a little. She looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "This was never about happiness, Rach. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming the 7 years he stole from me." She never told me her exact final words to him, but she hinted at their power. I wanted him to understand, fundamentally, that he was never in her league, she said once, that his betrayal wasn't just a mistake. It was a profound miscalculation of who he was married to. In that moment, watching her, I believed her. I knew the other woman was the catalyst. Amelia admitted it. "His crime wasn't the affair," she explained, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "It was the assumption that I was a decorative object in his life, one that could be quietly replaced. He needed to learn that I was the foundation, and I could take the whole house with me." I admired her strength, but God, I feared the woman she was becoming. "He lost," she said simply, after it was all over. "He just never realized we were playing different games. His was about ego, mine was about survival." She said he'd screamed at her, called her a demon. She just shrugged. "Maybe I am. He created me." I pictured it in my head, her standing there completely unmoved as this titan of industry fell to pieces at her feet. There was a part of me, the part that loved the old, softer Amelia, that was horrified. But the part that had held her while she sobbed for months on my couch just thought, good. I saw her new smile for the first time a week later. It wasn't the big, easy laugh I'd known my whole life. It was smaller, sharper, and utterly confident. It was the smile of a chess master who had just said, "Checkmate." She told him it was her final gift. The gift of a clean slate, an absolute zero, for both of them. After the dust settled, a quietness fell between us. We didn't talk about Alex anymore. He was a ghost, a story that was over. Her focus shifted entirely to her future, to building a new life. For her and Alex, it was the end. For her and me, it was a strange new beginning. I saw how her world shrank and intensified until it was just her and Ethan. All that ferocious intelligence and strategy was now focused on making his world safe and whole. Seeing them together, him tucked under her arm, I knew she had saved the only part of the kingdom that ever really mattered. I think she cried, but only once, in private. Not for him, but for herself. For the girl she'd been and the woman she'd been forced to become. It was a funeral for her own innocence. After that, there was only forward, only freedom. She used the settlement money and her own savings to open a small design firm. People thought she was crazy, but I knew. Alex's greatest mistake wasn't cheating on her. It was underestimating her. He taught her that the only person you can ever truly rely on is yourself. And of course, the firm took off. Her taste was impeccable. Her will was iron. She sold the penthouse and bought a beautiful little house with a big backyard for Ethan. I went over one night, and through the window, I saw her and Ethan laughing. It didn't look like revenge. It looked like peace. I sometimes thought about the other woman, a ghost in this story. She wasn't just a mistress. She was the pawn Amelia had sacrificed to win the game. A piece of collateral damage. I wondered if she ever understood the sheer scale of the board she'd stepped onto. We heard rumors that Alex moved somewhere down south, a fallen king in exile. Amelia never asked, never showed any interest. To her, he had ceased to exist the moment he signed those papers. He wasn't a memory, he was just a lesson. A year later, I was at her house and saw a drawing taped to the fridge. It was a picture Ethan had drawn of him and his mom under a giant protective tree. It was beautiful and perfect, but I could feel the empty space where a father should have been. Her victory had a cost, and it broke my heart for all of them. She told me he tried to call once, months later. She didn't pick up. She just blocked the number and went back to helping Ethan with his homework. She had exorcised him so completely he couldn't even haunt her anymore. She had taken back the narrative and written him out of it. But sometimes, when we'd share a bottle of wine after Ethan was asleep, I'd look at her and wonder, was the victory enough? Was it warm at night? My loyalty to her was absolute, but I worried that in her quest for justice, she'd walled off a part of her own heart. You can't orchestrate that level of destruction without getting some shrapnel in your own soul. Alex and that woman gave her the motive and the means. They lit the match. But Amelia was the one who chose to pour the gasoline. Her hands were clean, but I have to believe she still feels the heat sometimes. You don't walk through that kind of fire without getting burned. I watched the gentler, more trusting parts of my friend burn away, replaced by something stronger, but also harder. She won the war, but I'll always mourn the parts of her that were a casualty of it. I used to see their story in black and white. He was the villain. She was the victim. But it was so much messier. He was weak, she was wounded, and the other woman was a fool. Amelia just decided she was done being the victim and chose to be the victor instead. If I could go back and talk to that girl crying on the closet floor, what would I say? I think Amelia answered that for me once. I asked her if she regretted any of it. She looked at me, her gaze unwavering, and said, "I only regret the years I wasted believing he was worthy of me." I see her in magazines now, a celebrated designer. The smile she wears is different. It's not born of happiness, but of resilience. It's the profound calm of a woman who faced her own ruin and chose to rebuild the world in her own image. She wasn't an avenger. She was the architect of her own salvation. I'm sure she carries scars no one can see. But she's walking in the light she created for herself, and she is whole. I spent so much time being afraid for her, but I see it now. The respect I feel for her is deeper than any fear. She didn't just get even. She got free.